And please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I would love to interact with you legends. Now to the story. Grace seemed like the perfect match on paper. Her profile was full of smiles, travel photos, and inside joke style captions that made her seem easygoing. She messaged first, which was rare, saying she liked my playlist from a screenshot I had posted. We talked for 3 days straight, and it all flowed easily. She was funny, witty, and confident. When she suggested we meet for dinner, I didn't hesitate. It felt like one of those matches that might actually turn into something. We chose a casual restaurant that had just opened downtown. It had that warm, buzzing energy of a place still new enough for people to post about. When I got there, she was already sitting by the window, smiling like she'd been waiting all day. She looked even better in person. She stood up to hug me right away, laughing as if we were old friends. From the second we sat down, she didn't stop smiling. She laughed at everything I said, even the things that weren't funny. I'd make an offhand comment about the menu, and she'd burst out laughing like it was the best joke she'd ever heard. It wasn't forced at first. It was flattering, but after a while, it felt strange. Her laughter was too loud, too constant, like she was performing. I started noticing how her eyes didn't match the laughter. They looked tired, red around the edges, like she hadn't slept. She'd take long sips of her drink and keep brushing her hair behind her ear like she needed to keep herself busy. When I asked if she was okay, she just laughed again and said it had been the day. Halfway through dinner, the mood shifted completely. One minute she was laughing at something dumb I said about bad movie sequels, and the next she went silent. I thought she was choking at first, but she just sat there staring at her plate. Then she started crying. Not a single tear kind of cry. Actual, shaking, quiet sobs. I froze. The restaurant wasn't loud enough for it to go unnoticed. People were definitely looking. I asked what was wrong, and she took a few seconds to speak. Her voice cracked when she said her ex had dumped her that morning. I didn't even know what to say. She said they'd been together for over a year, and that she planned to spend the weekend with him. Then out of nowhere, he ended it over text. She said she downloaded the dating app that afternoon to distract herself, and I'd been the first person she matched with. She said she didn't expect to actually meet anyone, but she didn't want to be alone. It was awkward, sure, but part of me felt bad for her. I told her it was okay, that everyone's been through that kind of thing. She nodded, wiping her face, and started laughing again, like she was trying to erase the moment. Except this time, the laughter sounded manic. She said it was funny because her ex was throwing a birthday party that night, and most of their mutual friends were there. She said he'd told everyone she wasn't invited. I told her she should probably just forget about him and move on, but she leaned forward and asked me something that caught me off guard. She asked if I'd come to the party with her. At first, I thought she was joking, but she looked dead serious. She said it would help her get closure, that if she showed up with someone new, it'd prove she was fine. She said I wouldn't have to stay long, just pretend to be her boyfriend for a bit. I laughed awkwardly, thinking she'd realize how crazy that sounded. She didn't. She grabbed my hand across the table and said she couldn't face him alone. Her eyes were desperate. I didn't know what to do. I told her it wasn't a great idea, but she just smiled through her tears and said it was already happening. She stood up, threw her napkin on the table, and said we should leave before it got too late. I just sat there for a few seconds, trying to process what was going on. Against my better judgment, I followed her outside. Her car was parked right by the curb. She said it wasn't far. The whole drive there, she kept switching between laughing about old memories and muttering under her breath about her ex. She said things like how he never thought she'd replace him this fast, and how tonight would remind him who he lost. We pulled up to a house that was clearly hosting a party. Cars lined the street, music spilling out the windows. My stomach dropped. She parked, checked her reflection in the mirror, and said she was ready. Then she turned to me and said if anyone asked, we'd been dating for 2 months. She even told me her ex's name ran, and said I shouldn't look at him too long because he'd get competitive. I told her this was a bad idea, but she was already out of the car. I followed reluctantly. As soon as we walked in, the noise hit. The place was packed with people laughing and talking, cups in their hands. Grace walked straight in like she belonged there. People turned when they saw her. I could tell immediately that everyone knew who she was. The energy shifted, quiet stares, whispers. She tightened her grip on my arm and smiled like nothing was wrong. Then I saw him, Ryan. He was standing near the kitchen mid-conversation when he noticed us. His smile dropped instantly. He didn't look angry, just cold. Grace saw him too and leaned her head on my shoulder like we were an actual couple. My stomach was in knots. Ryan walked over slowly. Grace smiled wide and introduced me as her boyfriend. He just stared at me silent, then said he was surprised she'd moved on so fast. I tried to say something polite, but Grace cut me off, talking over him, saying how amazing I'd been to her. The whole thing felt staged, like she rehearsed it. Ryan laughed under his breath, said something I couldn't catch, then walked away. Grace's hand was still shaking on my arm. I thought that was it, that she'd made her point, and we'd leave. But she didn't. She stayed. She started mingling, introducing me to random people as her boyfriend, all while keeping one eye on Ryan. Every time he looked in our direction, she'd suddenly act extra affectionate. After about 20 minutes, I told her I was leaving. She looked panicked and begged me to wait just a little longer. She said Ram was finally watching her, that she could feel it. Then, as she was saying that, he came back, this time with another girl. He wrapped his arm around the girl's waist and smiled at Grace. It worked. Her face went blank. She let go of my arm and walked straight out the door without saying anything. I followed her to the car. She sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead. Then she started crying again, loud, messy crying. She said she thought it would help, but it made her feel worse. I didn't know what else to do but tell her to go home and sleep. She nodded, wiped her face, and apologized for everything. Then she dropped me off back near the restaurant, said thank you, and drove off. That night, I blocked her number. The next morning, I woke up to a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a group chat. Someone had written, Grace brought a random guy to Ryan's party. He looked terrified. Underneath was a photo, me standing awkwardly in the corner while she smiled at the camera. I never heard from her again. It started out like any normal first date that's doomed to go slightly awkward. Chris and I matched on a dating app that week, and his profile looked harmless enough. He had a regular job, lived nearby, and liked hiking. Nothing stood out in a bad way. Our chats were short and simple, mostly him asking about my work and favorite food. He seemed nervous but kind, and after a couple of days, we set a time to meet at a diner close to the main road. When I got there, he was already sitting at a booth, looking like he'd been waiting a while. He waved awkwardly, half standing as I walked up. Right away, I noticed something off about him. His leg was bouncing under the table, his eyes darting around the room every few seconds. He smiled, but it looked forced, like he was trying to convince himself everything was okay. I figured maybe he was just one of those anxious types. It's normal to be nervous on a first date. I sat down, and we started with the usual questions. What do you do? Where are you from? How long have you lived around here? But he wasn't really listening. Every time I spoke, he nodded too quickly, barely looking at me. Then he glanced for the door again. After a few minutes, I tried to lighten the mood by joking about how weird online dating can get. He didn't laugh. Instead, he froze for a second, staring at me like something had just clicked. Then he leaned forward slightly, still looking at me, and said I looked really familiar. That threw me off. I laughed nervously and said maybe we passed each other somewhere before, but he didn't smile. He just stared harder like he was trying to place me. His eyes narrowed, and then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said he knew where he recognized me from. He said I was a witness from a car accident 6 months ago on the intersection near the petrol station. My mind went blank for a second. I had no idea how to react. That accident had been minor. 2 cars, one rear-ended the other. I'd been walking past when it happened and gave a short statement to the police since I'd seen the light change. I didn't think about it after that. I never saw the drivers again. But now, sitting across from this guy, I realized one of those drivers must have been him. I laughed weakly and said that was crazy, but he nodded fast, saying no, he was sure. He said he read my name in the report they gave him later. Then his voice got quieter, almost a whisper. He said he hadn't told the truth that day. My throat went dry. He said he'd lied to the police about what happened, that it wasn't the other driver's fault like he claimed. He said he'd been distracted, looking at his phone, and rear-ended the other car, but he panicked and blamed the driver in front. He said he told him I didn't actually see the crash clearly. He said the case was being reopened because the insurance company was pushing back and the police had been calling him again. His hands were shaking as he spoke. I could tell he was unraveling, trying to explain it like a confession he didn't know how to stop. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there, completely frozen. He looked like he was about to cry. He said he'd been terrified ever since the crash, that it ruined everything for him. He said when he saw my profile, he thought it was fate, that maybe if I got to know him, I'd understand he wasn't a bad person. That's when I realized this date wasn't random. He hadn't just swiped right by coincidence. He recognized me from the start. He must have searched me up somehow, found my social media, maybe through the report or mutuals online. He'd known exactly who I was before the date even started. My heart was pounding now. I forced a smile and said maybe we should get the check soon. He nodded too quickly again, trying to act casual, but he kept rambling. He said the police had been calling all week, and he was worried I'd said something new to them. I told him I hadn't even thought about the case since it happened. Then out of nowhere, he said if things went bad, he could lose everything. His job, his license, his apartment. He said it like he was begging for pity, like I had some kind of power over what happened next. I wanted to leave, but part of me was scared that standing up would set him off. He was sweating now, looking around the room again, hands gripping his cup so tight his knuckles were white. I told him it was fine, that it was probably nothing, just a formality. He didn't seem to hear me. He was whispering to himself, repeating that he should have been honest from the start. Then 10 minutes later, it got worse. 2 police officers walked into the diner. They didn't look rushed, just scanning the tables calmly. I didn't think anything of it at first, until I saw Chris freeze completely. His face went pale. He slouched down slightly, whispering under his breath that they were here for him. I told him he was probably overreacting, but he looked like he was going to be sick. The officers stopped near the counter and spoke to the hostess. She pointed toward the back half of the diner, our section. Chris muttered something like, "They found me," and started panicking. He said he needed to go out the back door before they got to him. Before I could even process what was happening, he stood up, knocking over his drink. The officers noticed immediately. One of them called out to him, but he bolted. He ran straight toward the kitchen entrance, pushing past a waiter who dropped a tray of plates. Everyone turned to look. The officers chased after him, yelling for him to stop. I just sat there frozen, still trying to catch up to what I'd just witnessed. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back out. He asked if I was with him. I nodded weakly, explaining we were just meeting for the first time, and that I had no idea what was going on. The officer sighed and said they'd been looking for him since that morning. Apparently, he'd skipped a meeting about insurance fraud and was wanted for questioning. He said they'd caught him behind the building. I left the diner right after giving my name, feeling like I was walking through a bad dream. When I got home, I looked at the accident report online. It had been updated the week before. There was a note about ongoing investigation and false statements under review. I didn't even want to imagine what else he'd lied about. I deleted the dating app that night. I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it was for someone to find me, that he'd gone out of his way to track me down just to try to rewrite his own mistake. The weirdest part, 2 days later, I got a message request from a new account. It just said, "Thanks for not saying anything." I blocked it right away. I met Ava through a coworker who swore she was sweet, quiet, and ready to start dating again. Those words made it sound like she'd just gotten out of something serious, but I didn't want to pry. We messaged for a few days, and she seemed normal enough. Her texts were full of smiley faces, and she asked a lot of questions about what I like to do. She said she wanted to meet somewhere calm, nothing fancy, just a place where we could actually talk. We picked a quiet Italian place in the middle of town. When I got there, she wasn't there yet. I sat by the window, ordered a drink, and waited. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I was starting to think she wasn't coming when I finally saw her walk in. She looked flustered, out of breath, but she smiled when she saw me. She apologized for being late and said traffic was bad. I told her it was fine, and we started talking. Right away, I noticed she was jumpy. Every few minutes, she'd glance at her phone like she was waiting for something. She'd smile, then instantly look nervous again. I thought maybe she was just anxious. It's not easy meeting strangers from Sevs. We talked about small things first. Work, family, random stuff like favorite movies. She was funny, surprisingly quick with sarcasm, and the tension started to fade a bit. Then her phone rang. She looked down at the screen, and all the color drained from her face. She silenced it immediately, but her hands were shaking. She didn't answer it, just stared at the table. I asked if she was okay, and she whispered that she needed a second. Then she leaned in and said something that didn't make sense at first. She said her husband had found out she was out with me. I thought I'd misheard her. Husband? I froze, unsure what to say. She whispered that they were separated, but that he didn't handle things well. She said he must have tracked her location somehow, because he just called, and said he knew she wasn't at home. My heart started racing. I didn't know whether to get up and leave or ask her what she wanted to do. She was panicking now, checking the door every few seconds. She said if he showed up, I needed to pretend to be her cousin. She said it fast, almost begging. I didn't even have time to process it before her phone rang again, same number. She ignored it, but this time it didn't stop. It rang again immediately after. Then another text popped up. She turned her screen over, but I saw a few words, "Where are you?" and "Who is he?" Before I could react, she looked toward the entrance and froze. I turned and saw a man walking in. He was tall, maybe mid-30s, wearing a dark jacket. His eyes scanned the restaurant, sharp and furious, until they landed on us. Ava's hand shot out and grabbed my arm under the table. She whispered please without even looking at me. The man stormed over. He didn't even hesitate. He slammed his hands on the table and demanded to know who I was. Ava jumped and said exactly what she told me to say, that I was her cousin. My mouth went dry, but I nodded. I said it as calmly as I could, even though my voice cracked a little. The man laughed, not the normal kind of laugh, wanted the type someone does when they're seconds away from snapping. He looked at me, then back at her, then leaned down close to her face. He said something low I couldn't hear, but it made her flinch. The waiter rushed over, asking if everything was all right. The man snapped that it was family business. People at nearby tables were watching now. Ava whispered that he needed to calm down, but that only made him angrier. He said something about how she was lying, that he'd seen her messages, that she'd said she was meeting someone new. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I tried to diffuse it, saying we were just having dinner and that he should take it outside, but he turned on me fast. He pointed at me and said I didn't look like family. He said I was dressed too nice for a cousin. Ava's voice cracked as she tried to convince him otherwise. She said he was overreacting, that I was just there to help her talk through things. That seemed to set him off even more. He raised his voice, calling her a liar, saying she'd embarrassed him again. The whole restaurant was dead silent except for him. The manager came over this time, trying to intervene. He asked the man to step outside to talk, but he refused. He said he wasn't leaving without her. He reached for her arm, and that's when I stood up. I didn't even think about it. I just moved between them. I told him to calm down, that he was making a scene. He glared at me, and for a second I thought he was going to swing. Then Ava shouted his name. It stopped him for a second. She told him to leave, said he was humiliating himself. Her voice was shaking, but loud enough that everyone heard. The manager called for security, and the man finally backed up, glaring at both of us. He said something about seeing her at home, and walked out. The moment he was gone, Ava burst into tears. The manager checked to make sure she was okay and said the restaurant would call the police if he came back. She just kept saying she was sorry over and over. I didn't know what to do. I offered to walk her to her car, but she said she called someone else to pick her up. I waited by the door just to make sure she got there safely. About 10 minutes later, a different car pulled up. She hugged me quickly and said thank you, then got in and left without looking back. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop replaying everything. The way she grabbed my arm. The way her husband looked at me like he already knew my face. The next morning, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "Thanks for keeping quiet. He believes your family now." No name, no explanation. I deleted it immediately. I asked my coworker about Ava later that week. She looked confused and said she hadn't spoken to her in months. She said she hadn't even known Ava was dating anyone. That part still messes with me. I don't know if she made up the story about being separated or if she really was living through something chaotic. But I do know one thing, the way that man looked at me, it wasn't the first time he found her somewhere she shouldn't have been. I met Tyler through a friend of a friend who swore he was one of the most interesting guys she'd ever met. She said he traveled for work, wrote for magazines, and knew everything about food. I didn't think much of it. I figured that just meant he was passionate about restaurants. We exchanged a few messages online before he asked me out. His messages were formal, like he was writing an email instead of chatting. Still, he seemed normal enough, so I said yes. He picked a restaurant downtown I'd never been to before. It wasn't fancy, but it wasn't cheap either. It was one of those trendy spots with exposed brick walls, plants hanging from the ceiling, and dim lighting that made everyone look better than they actually did. I got there a few minutes early, and he texted saying he was on his way, but to grab a table. When he finally walked in, I recognized him right away. He had this confident walk, wearing a black blazer like he was headed to a business meeting. The first thing I noticed was that he carried a small leather notebook and pen. I thought maybe he was coming straight from work. He greeted me quickly, sat down, and before I could even ask how his day was, he started talking about how this dinner was technically a work assignment. I thought he meant it as a joke, but no, he meant it literally. He said he was a food critic and that this dinner was going to be part of his next review. He said it like it was a privilege that I'd been chosen to be part of his process. At first, I laughed. I thought maybe he was just passionate about food. But when the waiter came over, things changed fast. He didn't greet them normally. He introduced himself like he was a celebrity. He said his full name slowly, making sure they heard it, then said he was reviewing the restaurant for a major publication. I could see the waiter's face tighten slightly. After they left to grab our drinks, Tyler leaned in and whispered that he liked to see how staff behaved when they knew who he was. He said it tested their composure. I remember thinking it was a weird thing to say, but I tried to ignore it. When the food arrived, he pulled out his notebook immediately. He didn't even take a bite before criticizing how the plates were arranged. He tapped his pen against the table, muttering things like inconsistent garnish and presentation lacks identity. The waiter came back to check on us, and instead of saying everything was fine, he started giving unsolicited feedback. Loudly. He complained that the table was too close to the wall, that the music was distracting, and that the bread wasn't served warm enough. People at nearby tables started glancing over. I wanted to sink into my chair. I tried to cut in, change the subject, but he just kept going. He was analyzing every single thing. When his main course came out, he made the waiter stand there while he inspected it. He poked at the food with his fork like it was a science experiment, then sighed dramatically and said it was overcooked by 2 minutes. I could feel everyone's eyes on us. I smiled awkwardly at the waiter, who clearly wanted to disappear. Tyler wrote something down in his notebook and said it had cost them a star. The waiter left quickly, and Tyler leaned back in his chair, proud of himself. He started telling me about how restaurants used to comp him free meals because they feared his reviews. He said one chef once cried after he published a negative article. He laughed while saying it like it was a funny story. The whole time, I barely touched my food. I felt like I was part of some twisted performance. The energy in the restaurant had shifted. Even the manager was glancing over occasionally, clearly aware of the situation. When dessert came, Tyler told the waiter to bring whatever the chef thought best represented their skills. He said it in a tone that wasn't polite. It was commanding. The waiter nodded, clearly trying not to argue. A few minutes later, they brought out a small chocolate tart. Tyler tasted it and immediately started tearing it apart verbally. He said the crust was soggy, the filling lacked depth, and the plate presentation looked lazy. He said it all loud enough for half the room to hear. The waiter apologized, but he kept going. I finally told him he was being rude, and he looked at me like I'd insulted him. He said I didn't understand the responsibility of criticism, that it was about honesty. He said people like him kept standards high. It sounded rehearsed, like something he told himself often. The manager eventually came over. He was calm, polite, but I could see he was irritated. He thanked Tyler for the feedback, but said they didn't appreciate him disrupting other guests. Tyler smirked and asked if he was threatening a reviewer. The manager didn't bite. He just said he'd have to ask us to leave if the behavior continued. Tyler leaned back and smiled like he'd just been proven right about something. He said this always happened when he told the truth. I couldn't even look at him anymore. I grabbed my bag and said I was leaving. He didn't seem to care. He told me to wait a second while he finished taking notes. As I walked out, I glanced back and saw the manager standing by the bar, watching him with crossed arms. Tyler was still sitting there, scribbling in his notebook, completely unfazed that he'd just been asked to leave a restaurant. When I got outside, I started walking toward my car. A few seconds later, he came out too, calling after me. He said the place would get a terrible review and that it wasn't my fault. He said he'd write that the date was pleasant but poorly catered. I didn't respond. That night, I blocked him, but the story didn't end there. A week later, a coworker sent me a link to an online food blog. The title of the latest post caught my eye: Mediocre Food, Mediocre Company. The photo at the top was the same restaurant we'd gone to. As I read it, my stomach dropped. He hadn't changed my name, but he described me in detail. He called me uninspired, said I lacked palate awareness, and that I seemed uncomfortable in the presence of excellence. He even rated the date 3 out of 10. I reported the post, but it stayed up for days before being taken down. By then, it had already been shared and screenshotted. I heard later from the friend who introduced us that he'd done the same thing to 2 other women. Every date was a review. Every person was another character in his articles. Sometimes I wonder if he ever actually wrote for any real publication, or if the whole thing was just an excuse to insult people and feel powerful. Either way, I learned that night that there's nothing worse than a man who thinks cruelty is a talent. I met Megan through an app I'd already deleted twice that month. She wasn't the typical match I'd expect. Her profile was simple, barely 2 sentences. Just working on myself and trying to meet good people. No forced humor, no gym selfies, just a smiling picture of her at a cafe. Something about how plain it looked made me swipe right. She messaged first, which caught my attention right away. Our chats were normal, if not a bit heavy. She mentioned being in therapy early on, not in a dramatic way, just casually, like she wanted to be upfront about it. I didn't think anything of it. Everyone has stuff to work on. She seemed nice, funny, and genuinely interested in what I said. She suggested we meet up the following week, and we agreed on a small local restaurant that wasn't too loud. I thought it'd be easy and casual. The day of the date, she texted saying she might be a few minutes late because her therapy session had run over. I said no problem. I got to the restaurant early, grabbed a table near the middle, and waited. 15 minutes went by, then 20. Just as I started thinking I'd been stood up, I saw her walking in. She looked just like her pictures, maybe a bit more tired, but still smiling. I waved, and she smiled back, but there was someone walking right behind her. A tall man in a beige coat with a calm face, maybe in his 40s. I assumed he was another customer or something, until they both walked straight to my table. Megan stopped in front of me and apologized for being late. Then, without any hesitation, she gestured to the man behind her and said he was her therapist. She said he'd be joining us because he was observing her dating progress. I thought she was joking, but then he nodded politely and sat down next to her. He didn't introduce himself, didn't order anything, just sat there. He had a small notepad, a pen, and a completely blank expression. I didn't even know how to react. My brain went through about 10 different emotions in 5 seconds: confused, amused, embarrassed, annoyed. Megan acted completely normal about it, like this was totally fine. She started talking about her day, her work, random small talk, all while the man just sat there, eyes moving between us, occasionally writing something down. The waiter came over, and when he saw 3 people at the table, he asked if he should bring another menu. Megan said the man wouldn't be eating, that he was just observing. The waiter froze for a second before nodding and walking away, probably assuming this was some weird therapy session. As the conversation went on, I realized she was talking differently than when we texted. Every sentence sounded rehearsed, like she was being graded. She'd glance at the man occasionally, like checking if she was doing okay. He'd either write something down or nod slightly, and she'd smile awkwardly and keep talking. I tried to stay polite. I asked her about her hobbies, her job, how long she'd been in therapy, all normal questions. Every time I spoke, the man would look at me too, eyes steady, expression unreadable. It was unnerving. He wasn't trying to hide that he was listening to everything. He was studying us like we were a lab experiment. At one point, I asked Megan if this was something she did often, bringing her therapist to dates. She laughed a little and said this was actually her first time, but her therapist had suggested it as part of her relationship confidence plan. She said he was there to help her recognize unhealthy patterns in real time. I didn't know what to say to that. I tried to act normal, but it felt like being watched in high definition. I couldn't even make eye contact with her for long without feeling that man's gaze burning through the side of my face. When the food arrived, the atmosphere got even weirder. Megan started over-explaining her choices, why she picked the salad, how she'd been working on controlling her impulses around food. She said all of this while glancing at her therapist, like she needed his approval for every move she made. He just nodded and wrote things down. I noticed he hadn't spoken once the entire time. Not one word. Halfway through the meal, I decided to test something. I made a small joke, something harmless, about how this had to be the strangest first date setup ever. Megan smiled weakly. The therapist finally looked at me directly. For the first time since he sat down, he spoke. He said it was important not to make Megan feel self-conscious about her progress. His voice was calm, but his tone carried authority, like he was correcting me. I didn't even know how to respond. I just nodded and went back to eating. Megan looked apologetic, but she didn't say anything to him. The rest of the date was painfully quiet. Megan tried to fill the silence with random small talk, but it felt forced. Every sentence died halfway through because the therapist would jot something down again. I couldn't tell if he was judging her, me, or both of us. When the check came, the waiter clearly didn't know who to hand it to. He looked at all three of us, hesitated, and placed it right in the middle. I said I'd pay for my half, but before I could pull out my card, Megan said her therapist was covering the bill as part of her exposure exercise. The man nodded once and handed the waiter his card without saying a word. At that point, I was done. I just wanted to leave. When we stood up, Megan thanked me for being so understanding, and the therapist said he appreciated my cooperation. I didn't even look back at them when I walked out. Later that night, Megan texted me. She said she'd had a great time and that her therapist thought I was a positive influence. She asked if I wanted to see her again, maybe somewhere more relaxed. I didn't reply. A few days later, I got another message. It wasn't from Megan. It was from an unknown number. The text said, "This is Dr. Cohen. Megan mentioned you in her session today. I wanted to thank you for your patience during her field exercise. Your behavior was helpful." I'd blocked the number immediately. I still wonder if he really was her therapist or if she'd made that up entirely. Either way, I never saw either of them again. But sometimes when I'm sitting in a restaurant, I'll catch someone staring just a little too long, and I think about that man's blank face behind his notepad. I met Daniel through a mutual friend's Facebook comment section, which already felt old school compared to dating apps. He wasn't a total stranger, though. We had a few mutuals, and his profile looked clean enough. Photos with family, a dog, nothing flashy or fake. He sent a friend request first, and I accepted because I recognized a few names on his friends list. He messaged later that night, polite and kind of formal, like someone who still double-checked his punctuation. He said he wasn't great at chatting online and preferred meeting in person. That alone should have been a red flag, but he seemed genuine enough, so I agreed. We arranged to meet at a small restaurant downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it had a calm atmosphere, the kind of place where first dates usually go fine. I got there first and sat by the window. Daniel texted saying he was parking, and a few minutes later he walked in. He looked exactly like his pictures. Normal haircut, simple clothes, nothing off about him at first glance. He smiled when he saw me, that kind of relieved smile people make when the person they're meeting isn't a catfish. We shook hands, sat down, and ordered drinks. Everything seemed fine at the start. But there was something about him that felt slightly off. He was polite, but his eyes didn't match his tone. They kept darting toward the windows, the doors, the people around us. He'd ask me a question, then zone out before I finished answering. I asked if he was okay, and he laughed awkwardly, saying he just had a lot on his mind. The first 20 minutes were mostly normal small talk, work, pets, travel. He was nervous, I could tell, but I tried to keep things comfortable. Then, out of nowhere, he leaned forward and said he needed to ask something important. He asked to see my ID. I thought he was joking, so I laughed. He didn't laugh back. He just sat there looking dead serious. I asked why, and he said he just wanted to make sure I was real. I froze for a second, unsure if he meant it literally or if this was some weird form of flirting. He explained, calm as ever, that he'd been catfished before. Not once, but twice. He said one of the women had stolen photos from another girl and tricked him for months. He said he didn't trust anyone online anymore and just needed verification. I told him that was ridiculous, but he wasn't letting it go. He said it would take 2 seconds and that it was nothing personal. He leaned back like he was being reasonable, like asking someone for legal identification halfway through dinner was normal. I refused, obviously. He nodded slowly like he'd expected that and started talking again, except this time, his tone changed. He said that even if I didn't show him, he already knew who I was, that he confirmed everything before we met. I felt a chill crawl up my neck. I asked what he meant, and he smiled nervously, saying he hadn't done anything weird. He said he just wanted to be sure he wasn't being lied to again, so he'd hired someone to look into me. At first, I didn't believe him. I thought he was bluffing, maybe trying to mess with me because I'd called his ID thing ridiculous. But then he started listing things he shouldn't have known. Where I worked, the name of the street I live on, the kind of car I drove, even my dog's name. I hadn't told him any of that. Not online, not in our messages. He said he'd hired a private investigator, a friend of his who worked freelance security. He said the guy followed me to the restaurant to make sure I wasn't lying about who I was or meeting multiple guys. I didn't even know how to respond. I looked toward the windows, half expecting to see someone staring in, but the street looked normal. People walking, cars passing. He said the investigator wouldn't be close enough to notice, that he was just around. I felt sick. I told him that was insane, but he acted like it was completely justified. He said people online couldn't be trusted, that everyone hid something, and that he'd rather be safe than heartbroken. His voice wasn't angry, it was calm, rational, like he genuinely thought what he did made sense. The more he talked, the worse it got. He told me how he verified my workplace through a LinkedIn search, found my parents' names through public records, and even looked at property info to confirm where I live. He said the investigator just filled in the blanks. The waiter came by to refill our drinks, and I must have looked pale because he asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just needed some air. Daniel didn't even seem embarrassed. He smiled and told the waiter I was shy around strangers. As soon as the waiter walked off, I told him the date was over. I said what he'd done was disturbing and not normal. He didn't get up, though. He just sat there, looking at me with that same calm expression. Then he said he wasn't trying to scare me. He said he actually felt relieved now that I knew everything because it meant we could start honestly. I stood up and grabbed my bag. He stayed seated watching me, still smiling like this was all part of some trust-building exercise. I walked straight out of the restaurant, heart pounding, and didn't look back. When I got to my car, I glanced around the parking lot. Nothing looked suspicious, just a few parked cars and a couple walking by. But I couldn't shake the thought that one of those cars might have been his investigator. I got in, locked the doors, and drove off. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. It said, "You didn't need to rush. He already left. He said you passed." I blocked his number instantly, but I couldn't calm down for hours. The idea that someone had followed me, that he paid for it like it was normal, it didn't feel real. The next morning, I checked his Facebook. Gone. His entire account had vanished. Our mutual friend didn't know what happened either. She said she barely knew him, that she'd only met him twice through a group project years ago. She looked freaked out when I told her what he did. A week later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, it was a man's voice I didn't recognize. He said, "This is a courtesy call from Daniel's associate. We'd like to confirm you made it home safely." That's when I changed my number. To this day, I don't go on blind dates without someone knowing exactly where I am. I matched with Julia on an app I barely used anymore. She looked classy in her pictures. Well-dressed, big confident smile, a glass of wine in almost every photo. Her bio said she loved fine dining and strong opinions. I probably should have taken that as a warning, but at the time it sounded confident, not condescending. Our chats were fine. She was direct, funny in a dry way, and said she hated small talk. I liked that. I thought I was meeting someone sharp and self-assured. We agreed to meet at this mid-level Italian restaurant downtown. Not cheap, but not fancy enough to need reservations either. I figured it was neutral ground, comfortable and casual. When I got there, she was already seated. She picked a table right in the center of the room, like she wanted to be noticed. She looked just like her pictures, but somehow more intense. Everything about her was deliberate. The way she crossed her legs, how she set her purse on the table, how her eyes scanned me up and down when I sat down. It wasn't flirtatious. It felt more like an assessment. The waiter came by with menus, and before I even opened mine, she said she already knew what she wanted. She ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than what most people spend on groceries for a week. Then she asked for the most expensive starter, truffle bruschetta, and followed it with a steak and lobster combo. The waiter glanced at me, maybe expecting me to flinch, but I just nodded. I ordered pasta and water. She didn't ask if I was okay with the wine or if I wanted to share it. She poured herself a full glass and took a sip before the waiter even left. She started talking about how she didn't believe in splitting bills, saying it in a tone like she was stating a fact of nature. She said men owed women more than just dinner, that history had made things unbalanced, and it was time to correct that. I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She kept going, talking about how she never pays on dates and how it's a test. She said if a guy ever expected her to split the bill, she'd leave immediately because it proved he didn't value women. I didn't say much. I just listened, trying to decide if she really believed what she was saying or if this was some kind of performance. When the food arrived, she barely asked me anything about myself. She talked about her life like she was reading from a resume. Her job, her apartment, her travels, everything was about image. When she did ask me questions, they were weirdly specific, like she was trying to figure out how much money I made or what kind of car I drove. I dodged the personal stuff and just asked her how she'd gotten into her career. She smirked and said, by not settling for less. By the time dessert menus came out, I was already checked out mentally. I just wanted to finish my drink, pay for my half, and leave. She, on the other hand, was still going strong. She ordered a tiramisu and another glass of wine without even glancing at the prices. I said I was good. When the bill came, it was brutal. The total was $142. She didn't even look at it. She sat back in her chair, crossed her arms, and smiled like she was waiting for a performance to start. The waiter placed the bill closer to me, probably out of habit. I opened it, glanced at the total again, then pushed it halfway between us. She frowned. She didn't reach for her purse. She just stared at me, expressionless. I told her calmly that I was paying for what I ordered and she could cover hers. Her face went blank, then twisted into this small, irritated smile. She said that wasn't how she did things. She said real men don't let women pay, especially not when they're the ones who ask them out. I said it wasn't about that. It was about fairness. I said she'd ordered a 3-course meal and an entire bottle of wine without asking if I was okay with it. Her tone changed instantly. She leaned forward, eyes narrowed, and said that refusing to pay was disrespectful to her as a woman. I told her that respect doesn't mean being taken advantage of. The silence after that was uncomfortable. She stared at me for a full 10 seconds, then stood up. She grabbed her purse, said she was going to the bathroom, and walked off. I sat there wondering if she was actually coming back. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The waiter walked by and gave me a look. Then she came back, but she wasn't alone. She was holding her phone, visibly upset, talking loudly as she approached the table. She told me she'd call the police. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard her, but no. She said I was abandoning her after inviting her out and refusing to settle the check like a man. At first, I thought she was bluffing, but the way she was pacing, gesturing at me, and talking into the phone, I realized she actually done it. She said I was trying to leave her stranded. The other diners were staring now, some whispering, some pretending not to look. The waiter came over again, asked if everything was okay, and she pointed at me like I was the problem. I told him I was willing to pay for my portion, but not hers. He nodded slowly, clearly uncomfortable, and said he'd sort it out. She kept talking into her phone, throwing glances at me like she was the hero of some story being filmed. 15 minutes later, 2 officers walked in. Everyone turned. The manager rushed over to talk to them, and I could see the confusion on their faces as he explained the situation. One of them came over to our table and asked for both of our sides. I explained everything calmly, that it was a blind date, as she ordered excessively without asking, and that I was paying for my half. The officer turned to her, and she launched into a full rant about gender roles and how I humiliated her publicly. The officer's face stayed neutral the whole time, When she was done, he said this wasn't a police matter. He told us to pay for our own meals and leave. She looked like she couldn't believe it. She argued for another minute before finally slamming her card down on the table, muttering something about men being cheap. When I left, I could still hear her complaining to the staff. I walked fast, embarrassed, angry, but mostly stunned at how fast everything spiraled. The next day, I checked the app. Her profile was gone, deleted. But that night, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "You failed the test." I blocked it immediately. I met Ethan on a dating app that I'd already promised myself I was deleting after one last match. He wasn't the usual type I went for. He looked plain, brown hair, glasses, soft smile, nothing flashy. His messages were polite and kind of awkward, but in a harmless way. He didn't use pickup lines or act overly confident. He just seemed normal. That word alone felt rare enough to give him a chance. We agreed to meet at a small cafe near the center of town on a Saturday afternoon. It was one of those quiet places where people came to read or work on laptops, not a loud or chaotic date spot. I liked that. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting by the window with a half-empty cup of coffee. He waved as soon as he saw me, almost too eagerly, like he was relieved I'd actually shown up. When I sat down, he stood up slightly to greet me and almost knocked over his cup. He laughed nervously and apologized, saying he was clumsy when he was around new people. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just shy. He fidgeted a lot, tapping his fingers on the table, fixing his collar, checking his watch. I tried to make small talk to help him relax, but his replies were short and sometimes delayed, like his brain was stuck buffering. About 15 minutes in, things started to feel off. His eyes kept darting around the room. He'd smile for a second, then go completely serious. I asked if he was okay, and he said he was just tired, that he'd been up late working. Then mid-sentence, he suddenly stopped talking. He blinked a few times, pressed his hand to his chest, and leaned back in his chair. I thought he was choking at first. He went pale, breathing unevenly, then slumped sideways, hitting the floor hard enough to make nearby customers turn their heads. For a split second, nobody moved. I froze. Then instinct kicked in. I stood up, rushed around the table, and knelt beside him. His eyes were half open, his hand twitching slightly. I yelled for help, asking if anyone knew first aid. A barista grabbed her phone to call an ambulance. I touched his shoulder, trying to keep him still, telling him to hang on even though I had no clue what was happening. My heart was racing so hard I could barely think straight. The people around us started forming a small circle, whispering, watching. It felt surreal, like I was trapped in one of those nightmare moments where time slows down. Then out of nowhere, he started laughing. Not weak, shaky laughter, loud, full-on laughing. He sat up, wiped his eyes, and grinned like it was the funniest thing in the world. Everyone around us looked completely confused. The barista, with the phone to her ear, just stared at him. I was still kneeling beside him, frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. He looked at me and said it was a test. Those were his exact words. A test. He said he wanted to see how compassionate I was, if I'd actually care or just sit there doing nothing. He said most people failed. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him, stunned, as he stood up and brushed off his clothes like nothing had happened. The people around us didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. Some laughed awkwardly. Others just left. The barista asked if we were serious, and he told her everything was fine, that it was an experiment. He even thanked her for calling for help. I was mortified. My hands were still shaking from thinking he was dying, and now he was smiling like it was all some social project. He sat back down like he expected me to do the same. I didn't. I asked him why he'd do something like that, and he said it was to see who people really are. He said everyone lies about being kind or caring until they're put in a situation that forces them to prove it. I told him that wasn't something you test people with. He just laughed again and said that was exactly the kind of answer people gave when they failed. It hit me then that he wasn't embarrassed at all. He was proud of himself. He pulled out his phone, checked something, and said he'd been recording the audio. I demanded he delete it, but he just said it wasn't about me personally. It was part of a pattern he was documenting. He started talking about data and human reactions, and I realized he might actually believe what he was saying. The barista came over again and asked us to leave. He apologized politely, grabbed his jacket, and turned to me like we were about to continue our date somewhere else. He said we could grab a drink nearby, start fresh now that the ice was broken. I didn't even respond. I just walked out. He followed me out the door, calling after me, asking if I was upset. I told him not to talk to me again. He laughed and said that proved his theory, that people only care when they think someone's watching. He even had the nerve to ask if I had learned anything from the test. I didn't look back. When I got home, I blocked him immediately, but the story didn't end there. 2 days later, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, "I posted the results. You passed." I didn't open the link he sent, but my curiosity got the best of me later that night. I searched his name online, and I found a small blog with a few posts labeled Compassion Study. Each one described a different experiment. One was about pretending to lose his wallet, another about falling on a bus, and one about collapsing during a date. Each post included vague descriptions of the people involved, where they were, what they said, how they reacted. The most recent one was titled Cafe Collapse. It was my story. He'd written about how I panicked, how I immediately rushed to help, how I passed the test. He ended it with a line that said, "True empathy is rare but not impossible." I reported the site, blocked every number I didn't recognize, and tried to move on. But for weeks, I kept thinking about how easy it was for him to trick everyone in that cafe, how he made a joke out of something serious just to feed his obsession. Every time I go to a restaurant now, I can't help but glance at the people sitting alone, wondering if someone's waiting for their next test's subject. It started like every other blind date that I told myself I wasn't going to go on. My friend had set it up through someone she knew at work, said her friend Hannah was funny, cute, and not the type to play games. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go, but after a few days of messaging back and forth, I agreed. Hannah seemed normal enough online. She used punctuation, didn't write like a bot, and her photos weren't overly filtered. She looked casual, easygoing. Nothing gave me the slightest hint that the night was going to be one of the most awkward and weirdly humiliating dates I've ever had. We agreed to meet at this small bar/diner that had decent food and wasn't too loud. I got there a few minutes early and found a booth near the back. When she arrived, she was glued to her phone. She barely looked up when I waved. She slid into the booth across from me, still typing, thumbs moving fast like whatever conversation she was having couldn't wait. I figured she was just finishing a message, so I smiled and said hi. She said hey without looking up. A few seconds later, she set her phone face down on the table and smiled like nothing had happened. She apologized for being late, said something about traffic, and then started asking normal first date questions. What I did for work, where I was from, what kind of food I liked. Her tone was upbeat, but every few minutes she glanced down at her phone. At first, I thought maybe she was waiting for something important, so I ignored it. But it didn't stop. The phone would buzz, she'd flip it over, start typing, then look back up and ask another question. It started to feel mechanical, like she was following some checklist instead of actually talking to me. When our food came, it got worse. She'd take a bite, grab her phone, type something, laugh under her breath, and then look at me again like she was waiting for me to keep talking. I asked if everything was okay, and she said it was fine, and she just liked keeping her friends updated. I didn't really know what that meant, so I just nodded and kept eating. I started noticing patterns. Every time I said something kind of personal or tried to tell a story, she'd look down at her phone and type something right after. Then she'd pause and stare at me with this weird half smile, like she was waiting for something to happen. After about 20 minutes of that, I leaned over slightly and caught a glimpse of her screen reflection in the window beside her. There were group chat bubbles. Lots of them. She wasn't just texting one friend. There were 5 or 6 names on the top bar. I could see messages coming in fast, little bursts of laughter emojis and lines like, "No way he said that," and "ask him his favorite movie next." That's when it hit me. She was live texting the entire day to her friends. I tried to play it cool. I didn't want to look like I was snooping. I kept talking but started paying more attention to her reactions. When I mentioned that I'd never been to that restaurant before, she typed something again. A few seconds later, she asked if I thought the lighting was too dim. I could see her friends were literally feeding her lines in real time. She must have noticed I was getting quieter because she started talking more to fill the silence, but even that felt forced. It was like watching someone juggle a conversation and a live stream at the same time. Every few seconds she'd laugh, look down, type, and then look back up. Eventually, she excused herself to go to the bathroom. She left her phone face down on the table, but the screen lit up almost immediately. Curiosity got the better of me. I didn't touch it, but the messages previewed right there on the lock screen. The group chat name said, Hannah's emergency exit plan. The last message said, vote time, stay or bail. There were already 4 replies underneath. 2 said bail, 1 said, maybe 10 more mins, and the last one said, take a selfie with him first. My chest dropped. I sat there staring at the phone like it was proof that I'd somehow walked into a prank show. She came back, saw her phone, and noticed my expression. Her smile froze for a second. I think she knew I'd seen something. She didn't say anything, though. She just sat down slowly, put her napkin on her lap, and started scrolling again. The energy at the table shifted completely. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront her, or just leave? I decided to stay calm and see what she'd do next. For the next few minutes, she barely looked at me. She was glued to her phone, nodding at random like she was pretending to listen. Then, right in the middle of my sentence, she sighed dramatically and said she wasn't feeling well. No emotion, no hesitation. Just like that, she said she needed to go. Before I could respond, she grabbed her bag, checked her reflection in her phone camera, and said she'd text me later. Then she was gone, just like that. I sat there for a bit, staring at my half-finished drink, trying to piece together what just happened. It was like I hadn't been on a date with a real person. More like I'd been an experiment for her and her friends to rate in real time. When I finally got up to pay, the waiter gave me this sympathetic look like he'd seen everything. He said something about how it happens more often than I'd think, that people come in pretending to be present when they're just performing for someone else. I didn't even know how to respond. On the way home, I checked my phone, half expecting a text from her, but there was nothing. A few hours later, curiosity got the best of me, and I went back to her dating profile. It was gone. Deleted, like she'd vanished completely. The next day, my friend who set us up messaged me, saying Hannah told her I was too intense. I laughed out loud when I read that. Too intense, apparently, meant I actually tried to have a normal conversation. For a week, I tried to brush it off, but it stuck with me. The idea that she wasn't really there with me, that she was somewhere else with her phone, letting a group of strangers decide how the night should go. It made the whole thing feel creepy. It wasn't even the rejection that bothered me. It was the thought that I'd been voted off a date by people who never even met me. A few nights later, I was scrolling through social media and saw a meme account post a screenshot from what looked like that same group chat. It was a picture of a guy sitting at a diner table looking awkward, captioned, where the group says leave but you haven't finished your fries yet. The guy in the photo looked like me. Same jacket, same hair, same table layout. I stared at it for a long time before closing the app. I deleted every dating app after that. When I agreed to meet Ben, I thought it was just going to be one of those average, harmless first dates you forget about a week later. His messages had been normal enough. He wasn't too forward, didn't talk in dry one-word answers, and he seemed kind of funny in a sarcastic way. He said he liked going to the gym, worked in marketing, and just wanted to meet someone real. Nothing weird stood out. I even checked his socials. Looked fine. No red flags. Just photos of him lifting weights, smiling with friends, and one of him holding a dog that apparently wasn't even his. We agreed to meet at a cafe near the park on a Friday afternoon. It was one of those slightly crowded places with outdoor seating, people walking their dogs, and families having late lunches. I got there on time, grabbed a table by the window, and waited. 10 minutes went by, then 15. I texted him asking if he was still coming, and he replied with, yeah, just finishing something up, be there soon. He showed up 20 minutes late, sweaty, wearing gray joggers, a muscle tank, and carrying a gym bag. He looked completely out of place, like he walked straight out of a workout and decided not to change. He smiled when he saw me, like he hadn't just kept me waiting almost half an hour and said traffic was bad. But his hair was damp, and he still smelled like deodorant mixed with sweat. I figured maybe he was in a rush and didn't want to cancel. But then he said he'd just come from his ex's house. Not like a casual mention. Either he said it like it was part of the story he was proud of. He told me he was dropping off her stuff, and that she tried to convince him to stay for coffee. I just sat there awkwardly while he explained how dramatic she was and how he wasn't over her antics. Every time he said her name, his face tightened. He kept saying he didn't care about her anymore, but he also couldn't stop talking about her. He'd pull out his phone occasionally, glance at it, then flip it face down on the table like he was waiting for her to text. I started zoning out halfway through, just nodding every few seconds. When the waiter came, I ordered an iced coffee and a sandwich. Ben said he wasn't hungry because he'd eaten at his ex's place. That sentence alone made my stomach turn. He leaned back in his chair, still talking about how his ex needed to see him happy. Then casually he asked if I could help him make her jealous. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He pointed toward the window behind me and said her apartment was across the street. My heart dropped a little. I turned around and sure enough, there were flats overlooking the cafe. He said she could probably see us right now if she was home. He grinned and leaned forward, saying it'd be fun to mess with her head. I tried to laugh it off, but he wasn't letting it go. He started talking about how it would prove a point, and that maybe then she'd stop texting him. He said if I just kissed him in front of the window, she'd get the message. I couldn't even respond. My brain was still catching up to the fact that I was apparently part of some breakout drama I didn't sign up for. He must read my silence as hesitation because he got more desperate, explaining that it would only take a second and that it'd be good content if she freaked out. I told him I wasn't doing that, but he looked genuinely confused, like he couldn't understand why I'd say no. Then he stood up, walked around the table, and sat beside me. He pointed again, this time to a specific window across the street. He said that's her place. I tried not to look, but curiosity won. The curtains were open, and a light was on. He smirked and said that she was probably watching. I pushed my chair back, told him this was too weird, and that I was leaving. He laughed and said I was overreacting. Then, before I could get up, he grabbed my arm, not hard, but enough to stop me, and said I could at least pretend for a second. I pulled my hand away and told him no again. That's when his whole attitude shifted. He went quiet for a moment, staring down at the table. Then he muttered something about how girls always ruin things, and how his ex said the same thing. He started tapping his fingers against the table, his jaw tight. The waiter walked by again and asked if everything was all right, and Ben just smiled like nothing had happened. When I stood up to leave for real, he looked up and said she'd probably think I was one of the boring ones. That was enough for me. I walked out without saying anything. Outside, I could feel him watching me through the window. I didn't look back, just kept walking fast toward my car. When I got in, I sat there for a second, trying to calm down. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from him. He wrote she saw us. That made my stomach twist. I hadn't even looked at her window. I didn't reply. He sent another message right after. She's texting me now. Thanks, that worked. I blocked him immediately. A few days later, I got a message from an unknown number. It said, she wants to meet you. She says she liked your hair. No name, no context. Just that. I blocked that number too, the whole thing got under my skin. I started wondering if he actually told her about me, if maybe she'd seen me sitting there and thought I was part of some revenge plan. About a week later, I was walking back from the store near the same cafe when I saw him again. He was standing on the corner across the street, same gym clothes, staring up at the windows. I ducked behind a car and watched him. He stood there for a few minutes, phone in hand, like he was waiting for someone to notice him. Then he laughed to himself and walked away. I don't go near that area anymore. I met Olivia on a Tuesday night when I wasn't even planning to use the app. It was one of those nights where you're half bored, half curious, and you swipe just to see who's around. Her profile wasn't like most. She didn't have filters or mirror selfies, just a few photos that looked normal. A picture at a coffee shop, one with her friends at a park, and one of her holding a dog that wasn't even hers. Her bio said she liked people who didn't lie about small things. I didn't think much of it, but looking back, that line makes more sense now. We matched that same night, and she messaged first. She had this really direct way of talking, no small talk, just jumped straight into questions. She asked about my job, what music I liked, and what I usually did on weekends. It felt like an interview at first, but she was funny in a weird way, so I went along with it. We texted for a few days before she suggested meeting in person. She picked a restaurant halfway between where we both lived. It was a small modern place with dark lighting and those tiny tables that barely fit two plates. She said she liked it because it was quiet, and you could really observe people there. That should have been a red flag, but I just thought she meant it was peaceful. When I got there, she was already seated. She had this calm look about her, straight posture, barely touching her phone, like she'd been sitting there waiting and thinking. I said hi and sat down, and then she smiled, but it was that kind of smile that feels like it's being tested. She started asking questions right away, and they weren't normal first date ones. She asked about my sleeping habits, my food preferences, even if I was allergic to anything. I told her I had a shellfish allergy, nothing crazy but serious enough that I have to avoid it completely. She nodded slowly like she was taking notes in her head, then changed the subject to work again. The waiter came by to take our orders, and I told him I'd just get a salad and a side of fries. Olivia said she'd order for both of us because she wanted to surprise me. I thought that was odd, but didn't want to seem uptight, so I said okay. While we waited, she kept asking more personal questions. It wasn't flirty, it was clinical. Like she was trying to measure how honest I was with each answer. She asked about my childhood, my exes, even my blood type at one point. She said she liked knowing how people's minds worked, especially how they react to pressure. That last part made me uncomfortable. I laughed it off, but she didn't laugh back. She just tilted her head slightly and stared at me like she was watching for something. When the food arrived, the waiter placed a big seafood pasta dish right in front of me. I froze. It was loaded with shrimp and clams. She smiled across the table and said she ordered it because she wanted to see if I was telling the truth. I asked her what she meant, and she said people lie about allergies all the time to get attention or avoid certain foods. She said she just wanted to confirm I wasn't one of them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told her that wasn't funny, and she just shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. She said she'd been lied to too many times and didn't trust what people said anymore. I stared at the plate, a smell already making me uneasy. I told her I wasn't touching it, and that it was messed up she even did that. She said that's exactly how liars react. She started going off about how honesty was the foundation of everything. How you could tell everything about a person by how they handle being tested. The people at the next table were starting to notice the tension. I could see them glancing over. Olivia didn't care. She sat there with her fork in hand, still watching me, waiting to see what I'd do. It was like she wanted me to break some invisible rule. I told her she was out of line, and she just smiled again. That same calm, fake smile. She said I was proving her point. She started eating her food like nothing happened, occasionally glancing up at me to see if I'd changed my mind. I didn't touch anything. I just sat there in silence until I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and told her I was leaving. She didn't react, didn't try to stop me. She just said that she hated quitters. Her voice was so flat it didn't even sound angry. I walked out before the waiter could come back, still half in disbelief that someone would actually do something like that. When I got to my car, I sat there for a minute trying to calm down. My phone buzzed a few minutes later. It was a text from her. She wrote, "You did well not to eat it. Most people fail." That sent a chill down my spine. I didn't reply. I blocked her right after. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail was from the restaurant. They said the woman I'd been with had left without paying for either of our meals. They asked if I wanted to cover it or if they should report it as dine and dash. I ended up paying the $42 just to end it. I told my friend about it later, and he looked her up online. Turns out she had different profiles on almost every dating app, each with slightly different bios, but always something about honesty or trust. One of them even said, "I test people. Don't apply if you can't handle the truth." I reported her account and deleted the app completely after that. But a few weeks later, I got a random message request on another platform. It was from a new account, no profile picture, just a single line that said, "Do you still tell people about your allergies?" I blocked it instantly. Sometimes I still think about how calm she looked that night, how she acted like poisoning someone would have just been a lesson to her. The first time I saw Ryan's profile, I almost swiped left because his bio just said, "Content is life." It sounded pretentious, but his pictures looked normal enough. He wasn't one of those guys posing with money or cars, just casual photos at cafes, smiling with friends, one where he was holding a camera. I figured maybe he was a film student or something. When we started chatting, he was actually pretty funny. He talked about how he liked capturing real reactions and that he was working on a project about authenticity. I didn't think much of it. I just assumed it was something creative, not something weird. He picked a trendy new restaurant downtown for our first date. It was one of those places with neon lights and fake grass on the walls, the kind that's always packed with people taking photos of their food. I got there early thinking I'd have a few minutes to calm my nerves, but Ryan was already sitting near the window, camera bag beside him. He waved me over, grinning like we'd known each other for ages. As soon as I sat down, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. I figured he was checking messages, but instead he pointed it right at me and started recording. No explanation, no warning, just straight up filming. I laughed awkwardly and asked what he was doing, and he said it was part of a social experiment. He said he wanted to see how people reacted to being filmed in public. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. He said I should act natural because authenticity was the goal. At first, I thought maybe he was just being a little eccentric. I tried ignoring it, focusing on the menu, but the phone stayed pointed at me. It wasn't even subtle. He'd adjust the angle, zoom in occasionally, then flip it to selfie mode to film both of us. People at nearby tables were starting to notice. The waiter came over to take our orders, and even then, Ryan kept filming. The waiter hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, and asked him politely to stop. Ryan laughed and said it was for educational purposes. The waiter repeated that he couldn't film other guests without permission. Ryan rolled his eyes but lowered the phone, at least for a few minutes. The moment the waiter walked away, he started again. This time he angled the phone to catch both me and the people behind us. He muttered something about crowd behavior and digital anxiety. I could feel my face getting hot. I told him it was making me uncomfortable, but he just said that was the point. He said people only realized how controlled they are when they're forced to confront discomfort. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it before. By then, a few people at other tables were whispering and glancing over. The waiter came back with drinks, saw the phone again, and this time called over a manager. Rand didn't even flinch. He just sat there, grinning like he was waiting for something dramatic to happen. The manager came up, polite but firm, and told him filming wasn't allowed inside. Ryan started arguing. He said he was exercising freedom of content. He said nobody can stop him from documenting the truth. His voice got louder with each sentence. People were staring openly now. I wanted to sink into the floor. I told him to please just stop, but he ignored me. He started filming the manager too, holding the phone inches from his face and saying something about corporate censorship. The manager stayed calm and said if he didn't stop, security would have to escort him out. That's when Ryan lost it. He stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor, grabbed his camera bag, and started ranting. He said society was obsessed with fake politeness, and that people like him were trying to wake everyone up. His voice echoed across the restaurant. The waiter looked mortified. A family nearby got up to leave. 2 security guards appeared from the entrance, and the whole time he kept filming, spinning around to get every angle. He shouted that this was proof of oppression. The guards told him to put the phone away, and he just laughed. Then one of them reached for his arm, and Ryan started yelling about how they were silencing art. They finally escorted him out, still holding his phone up high like some kind of trophy. I sat there frozen, everyone staring at me like I was part of it. I muttered an apology to the waiter, who gave me this sympathetic look and asked if I was okay. I just nodded and asked for the bill, even though we hadn't eaten. The whole place was dead quiet except for the sound of it shouting outside. When I walked out a few minutes later, he was still there, pacing near the entrance, filming himself. He saw me and shouted something about how I was part of the study. I didn't respond. I just walked straight to my car and left. That night, I tried to forget about it, but curiosity got the better of me. I searched his name online, and what I found made everything worse. He had a small YouTube channel filled with videos just like that. Dates, social experiments, and clips of him confronting random people about honesty in public spaces. In one video, he bragged about how his test subjects never knew they were part of something meaningful. He had a few hundred followers who hyped him up like he was some kind of genius. I scrolled through the comments, and one of the new uploads caught my eye. It was titled, "She Failed the Test." My stomach dropped. I clicked it, and there I was sitting at that same restaurant looking uncomfortable, trying to hide behind the menu. The video was cropped and edited with captions like, "Modern dating is fake, and she couldn't handle the truth." He even recorded himself outside the restaurant after being kicked out, ranting about how I represented society's obedience. I reported the video immediately, but by the next morning, it had already been shared across a few other accounts. People were commenting things like, "She looks guilty," or "He exposed her." It made me sick. I blocked him, deleted my profile on the app, and stopped checking social media for a while. A week later, someone sent me another clip. Different location, different girl, same setup. He was still doing it, still calling it a social experiment. Sometimes I still wonder how many people like me are out there, unknowingly starring in his videos, sitting across from him thinking they're on a normal date while he's filming everything. And the worst part is, somewhere out there, that video with me in it is probably still online. I matched with Claire on a Sunday night when I couldn't sleep and ended up scrolling for no reason. Her profile stood out because it didn't look like the others. No filters, no fake smiles, just a few simple photos, one at a beach, one with a coffee cup, and one blurry one of her with a dog that looked like it was mid-bark. Her bio said she liked honesty, confidence, and people who don't apologize for being real. I didn't think much of it at the time. We started talking that same night, and she was direct. She didn't do small talk. She asked real questions right away, what I believed in, what kind of people I couldn't stand, and what I thought was wrong with the world. It was kind of intense for our first chat, but she had a way of typing that made everything sound like a challenge, like I needed to keep up. So I did. After a few days, she asked me. She picked a steakhouse downtown, said it was her favorite place because it had character. I didn't mind. I don't eat meat, but I figured they'd have something vegetarian. When I got there, she was already seated, scrolling through her phone with her drink halfway gone. She looked exactly like her pictures, but sharper somehow, like she took up more space than she should. Her eyes had that kind of intensity that made you want to look away, that also made you feel like you shouldn't. She smiled when she saw me and stood up to hug me. It was quick, almost stiff, but she seemed friendly enough. We sat down, and things were fine at first. She was confident, talked with her hands a lot, and kept leaning forward like every sentence mattered. She told me about her job in marketing, about how she was trying to start her own brand, and about how most people were too lazy to do anything real with their lives. I mostly listened. Then the waiter came. That's where it all started. She ordered first a medium rare steak, fries, and a glass of red wine. When it was my turn, I asked for the veggie burger. She looked up from her menu immediately. It wasn't even subtle. She blinked twice, like she thought she misheard me. I told the waiter my order again, and she leaned back slowly in her chair, staring at me. At first, I thought she was joking when she laughed and said I was one of those. I asked what she meant, but she just waved her hand and said it didn't matter. The air around us shifted, though. Her voice dropped a little. She said something about how this is exactly what's wrong with people now. I laughed awkwardly, thinking maybe she was teasing, but she wasn't smiling anymore. She started talking about how weak people had become, how everyone hides behind labels like vegetarian or vegan to pretend they care about something when they actually don't. She said real people didn't restrict themselves. Real people took what life gave them. I didn't even know how to respond. The waiter came back with our drinks, and she kept going like nothing had happened. She said the world was falling apart because people had become too soft. She said men weren't men anymore. That line hit weird because it felt like it was aimed straight at me. She started talking louder, enough that the couple at the next table looked over. I tried to change the topic, asked her about her job again, but she just brushed it off. She said she didn't like being around people who didn't understand real hunger. It sounded like she wasn't even talking about food anymore. When the meals came, the smell of her steak filled the table. She cut into it like she was proving a point. She watched me pick at my burger, and I could feel her eyes burning into me every time I took a bite. Halfway through, she set down her knife and fork and said she couldn't do it. I asked what she meant, and she said she couldn't respect someone who didn't eat meat. I thought she was joking again, but she wasn't smiling. She said she'd been trying to meet someone strong, not someone afraid of what's on a plate. She said I was the kind of person who would let the world fall apart while talking about empathy. She was angry now, actually angry. Her face was red, her hands tight around her wine glass. I didn't even understand where it was coming from. People were staring. The waiter walked by slowly, clearly trying to read the situation. I just sat there frozen. She stood up suddenly, grabbed her coat, and said something about not wasting her time with someone who pretends to have morals. Then she stormed out, leaving her untouched steak and half-full glass of wine on the table. Everyone around us went quiet for a moment. The waiter came over, eyes wide, and asked if I was okay. I just nodded and told him I'd pay. The bill was $67. I paid without thinking, still processing what had just happened. When I got outside, she was gone. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars under flickering streetlights. I stood there for a bit, not sure whether to laugh or be freaked out. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. It said, "You'll never be remembered because you stand for nothing." I didn't reply. I went home and told my friends what happened, and they all joked about it, saying I should just ordered fries and left. But the whole thing stuck with me. There was something about how fast she switched from friendly to furious that didn't feel normal. It was like she'd been waiting for a reason to explode. A few days later, one of my friends sent me a screenshot of a dating app post. It was from Claire's profile, but her bio had changed. It said, "No weak men, no vegetarians, no one pretending to be kind." The comments under it were full of arguments, people calling her out, her replying to every single one. I blocked her, deleted her number, and stopped using that app for a while. But about a month later, I was walking past that same steakhouse with a coworker, and I glanced inside out of habit. I saw her sitting at the same booth, alone, cutting into another steak, phone propped up like she was waiting for someone. For a second, I wondered if she'd set up another date, or if she just sat there now waiting for someone else to disappoint her. I thought Josh was one of those rare normal guys online. He had that easygoing vibe, not too much effort in his photos, but enough to show he wasn't fake. A picture of him hiking, one of him with a dog, and another at some diner smiling with a milkshake. He messaged first, and unlike most guys, he didn't jump straight into weird questions. He just asked if I liked pancakes or waffles. It was stupid, but funny enough to keep me talking. After a few days of messaging, he suggested dinner at this small family restaurant near the edge of town. He said it was his favorite spot, quiet, not full of people taking pictures of their food. I liked that. It felt low pressure. When I got there, he was already seated in a booth near the window. He stood up when I walked in, smiled, and waved. First impression, he looked exactly like his pictures, just a little more tired. Still, he seemed nice. Kind of nervous, but a lot of people are on first dates. We ordered food, and things actually started off fine. He asked normal stuff. What I do, if I've lived in the area long, favorite movies, all that. He laughed a lot, and for the first half hour, it honestly felt like it could go somewhere. Then, out of nowhere, the whole atmosphere changed. He got quiet mid-conversation, stared down at his plate, then looked up and said he had to tell me something before things went any further. I wasn't even sure what he meant since it was literally the first date, but I told him okay. He sighed, leaned in a little, and said he was on probation. At first, I thought he meant something small like unpaid parking tickets or something dumb, but he kept talking. He said it wasn't a big deal, that it was just part of his situation right now. He said he wasn't allowed to leave the restaurant alone. I tried laughing it off like maybe it was a bad joke, but he wasn't laughing. Then he said very calmly that his court-appointed supervisor was nearby and would probably come in soon to check on him. I didn't even know how to react. My fork was frozen halfway to my mouth. I asked him what he meant by supervisor, but before I could process anything, the door opened, and this older guy walked in wearing a brown jacket and holding a clipboard. He scanned the room, spotted us, and came straight over. Josh just smiled like this was normal. The man sat down next to him without asking. He didn't even say hi to me. He took out some kind of form and started writing and nodded at Josh like he was checking a box off. Josh introduced him as his probation supervisor. My heart was pounding, and all I could do was stare. The man said he just needed to observe, whatever that meant. He sat there silent for a few minutes, then started asking Josh random questions, what he ordered, if he was drinking anything, if he had his medication on him. It felt I was suddenly trapped in some weird interview I hadn't signed up for. I was too stunned to move. The waiter came by with our food and froze too, glancing at the stranger sitting beside Josh. The guy gave the waiter this cold look and said he was fine without ordering. Then he turned his eyes back on me, like he was studying me too. Josh tried to make things less awkward by talking again, but just made it worse. He started explaining why he was on probation, something about an incident with his neighbor that he didn't mean to escalate. He said it involved property damage, But then he quickly changed the subject. His supervisor didn't look up from his notes, just kept scribbling like he'd heard it all before. I couldn't eat. I just sat there, watching the two of them, trying to think of how to leave without making it weird. The whole time, Josh acted like nothing was off. He asked if I wanted dessert. I said no, but he waved the waiter over anyway and ordered cheesecake for both of us. Then the supervisor started asking me questions. He asked how long I had known Josh, if I was aware of his probation, and if he'd been behaving normally. I stuttered something about it being our first date, and the man nodded slowly, writing something down. Josh looked embarrassed for a second, but then laughed it off, saying it was just procedure. When the food came, I forced myself to take a few bites just to keep things from getting worse. The man barely blinked, watching every move Josh made. It felt less like a dinner and more like a social experiment. After a while, Josh leaned in again and told me he hoped this didn't change how I saw him. I didn't even know what to say to that. I just smiled politely, praying for an excuse to leave. Then the supervisor's phone rang. He stepped away from the table to answer it, and Josh immediately looked nervous. He whispered that technically he wasn't supposed to be meeting people unsupervised, but he told his supervisor this was a family visit so he could still come. That's when I realized I wasn't even supposed to be there. My stomach dropped. I stood up, pretending I needed to use the bathroom, but Josh reached out to grab my wrist gently and said I didn't need to be scared. That made me even more scared. The supervisor came back, told Josh time was up, and stood beside him like he was ready to escort him out. Josh smiled at me again, said it was great meeting me, and that he'd love to try again sometime when things settle. I nodded without saying anything. They walked out together, and I just stood there frozen, watching them go. The waiter came over a few seconds later and quietly asked if everything was all right. I just said I'd pay and leave. The bill was $48, and I didn't even care. I just wanted out. When I got to my car, my hands were shaking. I sat there for 10 minutes before driving home. It felt like I'd stepped into some alternate world where people went on supervised dates like it was totally fine. Later that night, I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "This is Josh's supervisor. Just confirming you are aware of his situation and that there were no issues tonight." I didn't respond. Then, 5 minutes later, Josh texted from his own number saying, "He really liked you." I blocked both. The night started normal enough, which is the annoying part. If something had felt off from the beginning, I probably would have left. But everything seemed fine. I met Mia on a dating app that wasn't even known for serious stuff. It was one of those half-flirty, half-lazy apps people use out of boredom. She stood out because she actually seemed down to meet right away instead of doing that thing where people chat for weeks and never make plans. She said she was free Saturday and suggested a casual bar downtown. Her profile was full of beach pictures and selfies in bright outfits. She looked confident, but not fake. When I got there, she was already sitting at a booth near the back, sipping from a cocktail. She looked like her photos, which honestly felt like a win considering how these things usually go. I sat down, and the first thing I noticed was her watch. It wasn't even subtle. She kept looking at it every couple of minutes. I thought maybe she was waiting for something, but she smiled when she saw me and said she was just bad at managing time. She laughed about it, and it didn't seem like a big deal. For the first 20 minutes, it was fine. We talked about random stuff. Movies, her job, how bad the drinks were. But she kept checking her watch and her phone, like she was waiting for something to happen. It got awkward fast. I tried keeping the conversation going, but her attention kept drifting somewhere behind me toward the entrance. Eventually, she sighed loudly, put her drink down, and said something that completely threw me off. She said she didn't want to lie anymore and that she was actually waiting for her boyfriend to show up. At first, I thought she was joking. I even laughed because I thought she meant an ex or something. But then she said she wanted to make him jealous. That's when my stomach dropped. I asked what she meant, and she just smiled like it was the most normal thing in the world. She said they'd been fighting, that he didn't appreciate her, and that he'd been talking to other girls. So she wanted him to see what he's losing. Apparently, she told him she was going on a date, and this bar was one of their regular spots. I sat there trying to process all of it. She was calm, sipping her drink like nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, I was sitting across from someone who had basically turned me into a prop in her argument. I told her that wasn't really fair, that she should have just said something before, but she just shrugged. She said it was harmless and I should just play along. She even offered to buy the next round as if that made it better. I wanted to leave, but part of me felt weird about walking out mid-date, especially since she didn't seem dangerous, just unstable. So I said fine, but I was already planning how to get out early. About 10 minutes later, I saw a guy walk into the bar. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, and he looked around like he was looking for someone. Mia straightened up immediately. Her whole posture changed. I didn't even have to ask. I knew that was him. She leaned closer and whispered that I should act like we're having the best time. Before I could react, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. My brain froze. The guy spotted us and started walking over, his face tight and angry. He didn't even hesitate. He came right up to the table and just stood there glaring at her. She looked up at him with this smug smile, like she was proud of what she'd done. Then she told him he was late, like this was all part of a plan. I could feel everyone around us starting to pay attention. The air got heavy. He asked her something I couldn't quite hear, and she fired back instantly, loud enough for half the bar to hear. I wanted to sink into the floor. She stood up, pointing at him, listing everything he'd ever done wrong. How he never listened. How he never took her anywhere. How he made her feel invisible. He tried to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. She started crying mid-argument, screaming that she was done being disrespected. Then she turned toward me and said something like, "At least some guys actually care." I just sat there frozen, not wanting to get involved, but not sure what to do. The guy looked at me like I'd just stolen something from him. His face went red, and for a second I thought he was going to hit me. But instead, he laughed in this bitter way and said something under his breath to her. She threw her drink at him. It wasn't a movie-style splash. It was this awkward, messy throw that hit his chest and dripped down his hoodie. He didn't even react at first. He just stood there staring at her, then slowly turned and walked out. She shouted after him, still crying, then sat back down like nothing happened. People were staring. The bartender came over and asked if everything was okay, and she just smiled and said it was just drama. I wanted to disappear. She wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and said she felt so much better now. I didn't even know what to say. I told her I was going to head out, and she nodded like that was fine. Before I could stand up, she asked if I thought she'd done the right thing. I just said I didn't know and left. Outside, I walked fast. I could still hear her voice echoing from inside the bar. I got to my car and sat there for a bit, staring at my phone, wondering what kind of person does that. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later I got a text from her. It said, "He's begging me to come back. Thanks for helping you prove my point." I blocked her immediately. That night, my phone buzzed again. New number. The message said, "You didn't have to block me. We actually made up. He wants to meet you." I didn't reply. For a week, I kept getting random calls from unknown numbers. Each one would hang up as soon as I answered. I don't know if it was her or him, but it made my skin crawl. I deleted the app after that and swore off blind dates completely. Sometimes when I drive past that bar, I think about that moment. The way she kept checking her watch, how she wasn't really waiting for me at all. I was just part of someone else's fight. And the worst part is, she probably thought it worked. It started off like any other casual blind date setup. My friend had been pestering me for weeks to meet this guy she knew through work, saying he was sweet, mature, and family-oriented. Those words didn't exactly sell me, but I figured one coffee wouldn't kill me. His name was Mark. From the pictures she showed me, he looked decent, clean-cut, mid-30s, easy smile. He texted me a few times before we met, and he was polite enough, maybe a little too enthusiastic, but I brushed it off as nerves. We agreed to meet at a park cafe one Saturday morning. The plan was simple: coffee, maybe a short walk if things went well. When I got there, I texted to say I'd found a table outside near the playground. I thought nothing of it, just figured it'd be quieter. I was sipping my latte, scrolling through my phone when I heard someone calling my name. I looked up and froze. Mark wasn't alone. Walking toward me were 3 people, him and 2 little kids. One boy, maybe 6, and a girl who couldn't have been older than 8. They were holding his hands, skipping like this was some family outing. He looked so relaxed, so casual, like this was normal. Before I could even ask, he introduced them as his kids. Then he turned to them and said, "This is your new mom." I actually laughed at first because I thought it was a joke, but the way the kids smiled shyly and waved told me they believed it. I sat there completely frozen while Mark helped them climb out of the bench beside me. He ordered 3 drinks and 2 muffins like it was a planned family breakfast. My brain couldn't process what was happening fast enough. He started talking like we'd been dating for months, not minutes. He told the kids I loved animals, that I was going to fit in perfectly, and that we finally have someone who likes staying home. I didn't even know how to interrupt him. I kept waiting for some punchline or explanation, but it never came. He pulled out his phone and started taking photos. Not selfies, actual pictures of us sitting together, the kids smiling next to me. He even told them to say cheese. Then he asked me to lean in closer so it would look more natural. My smile was completely fake, and I could feel my hands shaking. He snapped picture after picture, even showing them to the kids like we were looking at family photos from a trip. When the waiter came to drop off the drinks, I mouthed help in my head, but couldn't get the words out. Mark thanked him and told him proudly that this was our first family breakfast. The waiter looked at me weird but said nothing. The kids were sweet though, too sweet. The girl kept asking if she could call me Mommy yet. The boy showed me a drawing he'd made that morning of all 4 of us in front of a house with a big dog. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and told him it was good. I wanted to disappear. I asked Mark quietly if we could talk privately for a second, but he just smiled and said there were no secrets in a family. He wrapped his arm around me like we were a couple and started talking about how nice it was to finally find someone serious. Then he said the kids had been asking for a new mom for a long time. Every word felt heavier. It wasn't just awkward, it felt wrong. His kids looked at him like he was their hero, like everything he said was truth. It made me sick to think he dragged them into this fantasy. I tried standing up saying I needed to use the bathroom, but he told the kids to wait with me because she won't be gone long. So I sat back down. I didn't want to scare the kids or make a scene. He pulled out his phone again and showed me photos of his house. It looked messy and cluttered, toys everywhere. He said there was an extra room for me to decorate however I wanted. I couldn't tell if he was delusional or just manipulating me, but it got worse when the kids started asking if they'd all move in together soon. He told them maybe next month if things kept going well. He looked at me when he said that, smiling like we'd already agreed. I forced a laugh and said I had to take a work call. I stood up and pretended to answer my phone, walking a few steps away. As soon as I was out of earshot, I texted my friend who'd set us up, asking what she knew about him. She texted back one line, "Wait, he brought his kids." That confirmed it. She had no idea. I came back to the table and said I really needed to go, that something urgent came up. Mark frowned but told the kids to say goodbye. The little girl hugged me around the waist before I could move. She said, "Bye, Mommy." My stomach dropped. He told me he'd walk me to my car, but I said no. I turned to leave. As I walked away, I heard him calling after me, telling the kids to wave. I didn't look back. When I got home, I blocked his number and deleted his messages. But that night, around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was a new number. The message said, "You looked beautiful today. The kids keep asking when they'll see you again." I didn't respond. The next morning, I got another text, this time a picture. It was one of the photos he'd taken at the cafe. Me sitting stiffly with his kids smiling beside me. The caption said, "Our first family picture." I called my friend again, furious, and she told me she'd confronted him at work. He'd laughed about it and said he was just manifesting his future. She said she'd reported it to their manager because apparently this wasn't the first time he'd done something like that. He brought dates to meet the kids on the first meeting before. For the next few days, I kept getting messages from random numbers saying things like, "We miss you," or "Don't give up on us." Each one came with another picture of the cafe or at his kids. I changed my number after that. I haven't gone on a blind date since. I knew the date was going to be weird the second I saw her walk in. Not because of how she looked. Lily actually looked better in person, but because of how fast she was talking before she even sat down. She was halfway through telling the waiter what drink she wanted before her coat was off. I remember thinking she just seemed nervous, maybe overexcited. I'd been on awkward first dates before, so I figured it was nothing. We met through this small dating app that basically matches people in the same few postcodes. She said she was studying psychology and wanted to meet someone real. I thought that was a bit corny, but her texts were funny, and she didn't seem like someone pretending to be someone else. We planned for a chill coffee date at this cozy cafe that had big windows and quiet music, the kind of place where you don't feel pressure to order food if things go badly. When she showed up, she gave this big smile that almost looked forced. Her eyes were kind of red around the edges, like she hadn't slept much. She started talking straight away about traffic, about how her ex still texts sometimes, about how she was late because her mom called. It was all in one breath. I barely got a word in. We sat by the window, and I tried to keep the conversation normal. I asked about uni, her course, what kind of movies she liked. She answered for a bit, then suddenly changed topics completely. It was like talking to someone who had a dozen tabs open in their head. About 20 minutes in, she got quiet out of nowhere. I thought maybe she'd realized how much she'd been talking, but then I saw her eyes start to water. She was staring at her phone like it had personally insulted her. I asked if she was okay, and she just nodded without looking up. Then she started crying. Not just tearing up, actual crying. Full-on shaking shoulders, sniffing, wiping her face with napkins, crying. I didn't know what to do. I sat there awkwardly holding my coffee while everyone else in the cafe tried not to look. She mumbled something about her ex, how he said she'd never move on, and then she said she needed to prove him wrong. Before I could even react, she unlocked her phone, scrolled through contacts, and hit call. The sound was loud because she put it on speaker. I thought maybe she just needed to talk privately, but she was doing it right there, in front of me, like the cafe was her stage. The call connected, and this guy's voice came through, confused. She told him she was on a date. She said she was sitting across from a great guy, and that she was so over him. Her voice was trembling like she was trying too hard to sound calm. People at nearby tables were starting to stare. I wanted to melt into my chair. I didn't even know what to do with my hands. I just sat there frozen, praying the call would end. Then it got worse. The guy must have said something back because her face went red, and she started yelling. Not just loud. Angry, broken yelling. She was calling him every insult she could think of, tears running down her face. Everyone in the cafe had stopped pretending not to notice. Even the barista froze behind the counter. I tried to quietly say that maybe she should hang up, but she ignored me completely. She slammed her hand on the table, her voice cracking between sobs and curses. The whole time, the guy on the phone was silent. I couldn't hear him anymore. Maybe he'd hung up, but she kept shouting, as if arguing with the silence itself. Eventually, the call ended. She stared at her phone like she just lost something important, then turned to me with mascara streaks down her cheeks and said it felt freeing. I couldn't even speak. I was just in shock. Then she smiled like nothing had happened and said she felt better now. She asked if I wanted another coffee. I told her I was fine, but she insisted on ordering for both of us. When the waiter came, he looked at me like he wanted to apologize for her. She ordered 2 cappuccinos and started talking again, this time about how she thought emotions made people real, how most guys couldn't handle honesty. I nodded along, but my brain was done. I was already thinking about how to leave. She started laughing randomly mid-sentence, saying she probably scared me. I said no, trying to be polite, but my face must have said otherwise because she suddenly leaned across the table and said she could tell I wasn't the type to deal with passion. When the drinks came, I took a few sips just to not look rude. She kept talking about her ex again, switching between saying she hated him and saying she missed him. Then she started scrolling through her phone, showing me old pictures of them together. Some were selfies, others looked like screenshots of texts she'd saved. She said she liked to keep them as reminders of how far she'd come. I checked the time and said I had to head out soon because of work. She looked disappointed and said it was a shame because she thought we had real connection. Then she asked if I could walk her to the bus stop. I hesitated but said okay, just to end it without making it worse. Outside, she looped her arm through mine like we were a couple. I didn't even know how to react. She was talking about how nice it felt to be out with someone again. Then, halfway to the bus stop, she stopped walking. She pulled out her phone again, dialed the same number, and called her ex one more time. This time she said, "See, he's walking me home now." I couldn't believe it. I just stood there while she kept taunting whoever was on the other end. She hung up, turned to me, and said she thought he'd finally get the message. I mumbled something about my train and walked off. She called after me, asking if I wanted to see her again. I didn't look back. That night, I got 3 missed calls from an unknown number. No voicemail, just missed calls. Then I got a text that said, "You handled today well. That's rare." I didn't reply. The next morning, I opened the dating app to block her, but her profile was already gone. Like she deleted it right after. A week later, I went back to that cafe to meet a friend. One of the staff recognized me. She said that girl, Lily, had come back the day after our date and cried at the same table for almost 2 hours. She told him she was waiting for the guy who understood her pain. I never went back again. I'd been talking to Tom for about a month before we met. His profile made him seem like that rare mix of funny and normal. No cringy gym selfies, no weird motivational quotes, just some travel pics and a dog that looked like it belonged in a movie. He messaged first and wasn't pushy. He actually take time to reply properly, not just send random emojis or dry one-word answers. By the time we decided to meet, I was convinced he was one of the good ones. He picked this small Italian restaurant near the center of town. It looked nice online, warm lights, outdoor seating, proper plates, not one of those fake classy spots that smell like fryer oil. I got there a bit early and sat by the window, scrolling through my phone. He was 10 minutes late, then 15, and I started thinking maybe he wasn't coming. But then he walked in. He looked different. Not in a bad way, just not what I expected. He seemed more tired, eyes red, kind of messy hair, and when he smiled, it was slow like he had to think about it. He apologized for being late and said traffic was bad. I let it go, figuring everyone has off days. We ordered drinks. He didn't even look at the menu, just told the waiter to bring a bottle of red wine. I hadn't even decided what I wanted yet. He poured himself a full glass right away and took a big sip before we even started talking properly. The first few minutes were fine. He was funny, I won't lie. He could talk about random stuff like he rehearsed it. Stories from uni, his crazy job, his travels. He had this way of making everything sound bigger than it probably was. But every time the glass got close to empty, he filled it again, barely giving the waiter a chance to leave. By the time we got our food, he was already on his third glass. I started feeling awkward, pretending to check messages just to avoid staring. His words were starting to slur, and he laughed too hard at things that weren't even jokes. At one point, he leaned forward and told me that people only show their true selves when they drink. Then he winked. I just smiled politely because I didn't know what else to do. He reached across the table, touched my hand, and said we had real chemistry. His hand was sweaty. I told him maybe he should slow down a bit, that the wine was strong, but he laughed it off. The waiter came by to ask if we needed anything, and Tom told him to bring another bottle. The waiter looked at me, almost like he wanted me to say no, but I just stayed quiet. Then it happened. He picked up his glass, tried to say something about trusting fate, and suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale. I thought he was choking at first, but then he just leaned forward and threw up. Right there, all over the table, on the food, on his phone, on his own sleeve. It was loud too. People at other tables turned to look. I froze. I didn't even know what to do. The smell hit right after, and that made me want to gag too. The waiter rushed over with napkins, and Tom just sat there wiping his mouth, mumbling about how this never happens. He tried to stand up but stumbled, knocking over the glass. Red wine mixed with the mess on the table, dripping onto the floor. The waiter asked if he needed help getting outside, but Tom insisted he was fine. He looked at me with this weird grin like we'd just gone through something romantic together. He said that it's kind of beautiful to survive disasters as a couple. I wanted to vanish. I told him I was going to get some air, but he grabbed my arm and told me not to leave him. His grip was too tight, his hand sticky. I pulled away and told him to sit down. The staff was trying not to make a scene, but everyone could see. One woman even whispered something to her friend while staring. He tried wiping the table with napkins, but it just smeared everything worse. His face was red and sweaty, his shirt soaked. Then, in the middle of all that chaos, he looked at me again and said something about how this proves we're meant to handle anything. That was it for me. I told the waiter I'd pay for what I ate and left. I didn't care how awkward it looked. I threw a $50 bill on the table and walked straight out. My hands were shaking. Outside it was cold, and I just stood there trying to breathe. My phone buzzed. It was a text from him. Somehow, even after that, he thought it went well. He said he liked how real the night was and that not many girls would have stayed. He ended it with a heart emoji. I blocked him. A few hours later, I got another message from an unknown number. It said, "You didn't even say goodbye." I waited. That freaked me out because I hadn't told him where I parked. I ignored it, but it kept replaying in my head. The next morning, my friend sent me a link to a local Facebook post. Someone had uploaded a picture of the restaurant mess with the caption, "When Tinder goes too far." The comments were full of people laughing, saying things like, "This is why I don't date anymore." I recognized his shirt instantly. He must have stayed after I left because one of the staff replied under the post saying the guy refused to go home, saying he was waiting for his soulmate. They said he sat outside for 2 hours. For days after, I felt paranoid that he'd show up somewhere. I blocked every number I didn't know, even deleted the app we met on. But one night, when I was leaving work, I saw a car parked across the street. Inside, someone was sitting still, headlights off. I couldn't see the face clearly, but I could make out a phone screen glowing. It was pointed toward me. I stood there for a bit, pretending to scroll through my phone, then walked a long way home. I told myself it was nothing, just some random person. But a part of me kept thinking maybe he thought we survived a disaster together, and in his mind, that meant something more than it did to me. I haven't gone on a blind date since. I don't even drink on dates anymore. Sometimes when I walk past restaurants, I'll still glance inside just to make sure no one's sitting there, red wine glass in hand, waiting. I honestly thought I was getting catfished when she first said that she was bringing someone along, but she didn't say who. She texted me the night before and said, "Hope you don't mind. I never go alone to first dates." I assumed it meant a friend, maybe for safety. I didn't question it because I get it. But I didn't expect what I walked into that night. The place was this small family diner outside of town, nothing fancy, kind of cozy. It had that old smell of fries, coffee, and those fake leather seats that stick to you if it's warm. I got there early because I didn't want to be the one walking in late and awkward. I was checking my phone when I saw two people walk in, a girl who looked like Emma from her photos, and an older woman who looked exactly like her, but with a tighter ponytail and a stare that could probably stop traffic. Emma waved at me like everything was normal. Her mom just followed behind her, holding her purse with both hands like it was part of the plan. I thought maybe she was dropping her off or something, but no. They both sat down, right next to each other, across from me. At first, I thought maybe she was joking. Maybe it was one of those weird TikTok prank things. But then her mom opened a notepad. I kid you not, a real notebook. She had a pen ready. She introduced herself and said she was here to make sure her daughter was making wise decisions. I just sat there staring like I'd walked into the wrong table, but no one was laughing. Emma looked kind of embarrassed, but she didn't say anything. She just smiled at me in that awkward, forced way people do when they're hoping something won't blow up. I tried to laugh it off and ordered a drink to fill the silence, but her mom was already firing off questions. She asked me about my family, where I lived, if I had a stable job, what I believed in, and if I wanted kids if I could cook. She even asked how often I talked to my mother. It was like a job interview, but worse, because no matter what I said, she wrote something down. Every answer got this small nod, and she'd whisper something to Emma. I kept looking at Emma, waiting for her to stop it, to say something like, "Mom, chill," but she didn't. She just kept sipping her drink, smiling politely. I tried changing the topic to normal stuff, asking about what shows she liked or where she wanted to travel. But her mom would jump in and answer for her, saying things like, "Emma doesn't like leaving the country," or "Emma's not into that kind of show." It felt like Emma wasn't even a person sitting across from me, just some project her mom managed. I started wondering if this was even about dating at all or if her mom was trying to pick her next son-in-law right then and there. When the food came, I thought maybe things would calm down, but her mom took over again. She asked the waiter if the meat was organic. Then she started cutting Emma's chicken into smaller pieces, right in front of me. Emma didn't even flinch. She just sat there, waiting like she'd done her whole life. I tried making a joke to lighten the mood, but her mom didn't even react. She just stared straight at me, then asked how much money I made yearly. I almost choked. I said something vague, but she didn't like that. She pressed for a number. Then she followed up with whether I had savings if I rented or owned, and if I planned on settling down soon. At that point, I knew I had to get out. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was creepy. There was something about the way Emma looked at her mom, like she was waiting for permission to breathe. Every time I'd look at her for an answer, her mom would tilt her head slightly, like giving a signal. When I excused myself to go to the bathroom, Emma's mom said she'd time me. I thought she was joking, but she pulled out her phone. I spent 5 minutes pretending to wash my hands, trying to figure out how to leave without looking like the worst person alive. When I came back, she actually told me how long I was gone. I made up some fake emergency about a friend's car breaking down and said I had to go help. Emma's mom asked which friend and what car. She said she didn't want her daughter dating someone dishonest, so I had to prove I was telling the truth. I just smiled, grabbed my jacket, and said I'd text later. As I walked out, Emma didn't even look up. She was just staring at her plate while her mom whispered something to her. I swear it looked like she was about to cry, but her mom reached out and held her hand before she could. When I got outside, I sat in my car for a bit trying to process it. It didn't feel like a normal bad date. It felt like I just witnessed something I shouldn't have. The way that woman controlled every second of the night didn't feel like protection. It felt like ownership. Later that night, I got a text from Emma. It just said, "Sorry about earlier. She says you weren't ready." That was the exact wording. She says, "Nah, I think." That freaked me out more than anything. I didn't reply. A few hours later, another text came through, this time from a different number. It said, "You made a poor impression. I advise you not to contact Emma again." No name, but I didn't need one. I blocked both numbers, deleted the chat, and tried to forget it. But then, about a week later, I got an email. It was from some random address, but the subject line said, "Character evaluation." I opened it out of curiosity. It was a PDF document with my name, age, job title, and notes about my attitude and future potential. At the bottom, it was signed, "Approved for reconsideration after 6 months." I don't know how she got my email. I'd never given it to Emma. I still don't know if it was her mom who sent it, or if they both had some weird system for this kind of thing. Maybe every guy she meets gets graded like that. Maybe it's some sort of control thing she's used since Emma was young. The creepiest part? I checked the email header, and it came from a business account with her mom's name and the words "family assessments" in it. I didn't even want to know what that meant. I stopped using that dating app completely after that. I kept thinking about how Emma just sat there the whole time, silent, watching her mom take over. I still think she wasn't allowed to leave without her. I honestly thought Jake was one of the normal ones. We met through a friend's post on some mutual story, and he seemed chill. He wasn't one of those try-hard guys with gym mirror selfies or weird quotes in their bio. He just looked ordinary. A clean hoodie, a dog in one of the pics, and a half smile that looked more nervous than confident. It made me feel like maybe he was just as unsure about dating as I was. We'd been messaging for a couple weeks before deciding to meet up. He picked this Italian place downtown that looked fancy enough to feel special, but not so over the top that I feel awkward. I remember being weirdly nervous on the way there, checking my reflection on my phone screen as if it would change something. I told myself to calm down, that it was just dinner, but something about that night already felt off in a way I couldn't explain. When I got there, he was already seated near the back by a big window. He stood up when he saw me, smiled, and gave this small wave that made him seem polite. I sat down across from him, and for the first 20 minutes, it actually felt normal. We ordered food, talked about random stuff like uni, pets, and how bad the traffic was. Nothing deep, nothing weird. He kept checking his phone, though. Every few minutes, he'd glance at it like he was waiting for a message. I figured maybe it was work or something important, so I didn't think much of it. When the waiter brought the food, Jake's phone buzzed again. He looked at it, frowned, then said he needed to take a quick call. He stood up, grabbed his phone, and walked toward the back of the restaurant. I watched him go, expecting him to come back in a minute. My food was getting cold, so I started eating without him. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. At first, I thought maybe it was a long call. Then I started thinking maybe something happened. I kept glancing toward the hallway where the bathrooms were, trying to see if he was coming back. He wasn't. I texted him, "Everything okay?" It didn't deliver. That's when the waiter came over, holding the check. He looked kind of awkward, like he didn't want to say it. He told me Jake had left through the back door. Apparently, he told the staff I'd be covering the bill before leaving. I just sat there for a second, trying to process that. The food, the small talk, the polite smile, all of it suddenly felt fake. I paid the $62, trying not to look embarrassed as the waiter handed me the receipt. It wasn't even about the money. It was the fact that someone could pretend to be decent for an hour and then vanish like that. I walked outside, half expecting to see him waiting around or something, but the street was empty. Just cars passing and a bit of wind. I should have just gone home, but curiosity got the better of me. I checked his profile again. Gone, unmatched, like he never existed. I texted our mutual friend who had posted about him, asking if she actually knew him. She read the message but didn't reply. That made it weirder. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started digging through old DMs, trying to see if I'd missed something. His messages were still in my inbox, but the account was gone. The more I thought about it, the less it made sense. Why go through the trouble of setting up a date, eating half your food, then slipping out? It wasn't just about skipping the bill. It felt planned. A couple days later, my friend finally replied. She said she didn't actually know him. She reposted a random story from another girl who had tagged him because he seemed nice. That made me freeze. I asked her who the other girl was, but she said she deleted her account ages ago. So I Googled his name. Nothing. I even looked up his dog's photo, reverse image search, like some detective, and found the same picture on a stock photo site. The dog wasn't his. None of it was. The name he gave me wasn't real either. It was like he built a full fake identity just to vanish halfway through dinner. It messed with me more than I wanted to admit. For weeks, I'd see guys that kind of looked like him, same jacket, same haircut, and my heart would jolt a bit before I realized it wasn't him. But then something happened that actually freaked me out. About a month later, I got a notification that someone tried to reset my Instagram password. It said, attempted from a new device. I ignored it, changed my password, and moved on. But then it happened again, and again. I didn't connect it to Jake at first, but then I read the recovery email attempts. The backup email being used had a familiar name in it, his, or at least the fake one. That's when it hit me. He didn't just leave to skip the bill. He wanted my info. Maybe my phone, my socials, something. I remembered how, when we'd been talking before the date, he asked where I lived, if I used certain food delivery apps, even what my Wi-Fi name was when we were joking about slow internet. I thought it was just small talk. But now I wasn't so sure. I went through everything, my emails, bank accounts, passwords, and found that someone had tried logging into one of my old online shopping accounts too. Same night, he vanished. The worst part is, I don't even know what he wanted. Maybe it was money, maybe something else. But it made me realize that he didn't just ditch me via a jerk. He left because that was his plan all along. I'd been sitting there eating pasta while he was probably walking out the back door laughing or logging into my accounts. I told a couple friends about it, but they just said, at least you didn't get hurt. And yeah, I guess they're right. But I still can't stand the thought that someone used my own trust like that. Every time I go out now, I double check who I'm talking to. I Google names, I ask mutuals for proof. I even look at LinkedIn before agreeing to meet. I haven't been back to that Italian place since. The weirdest thing though, a few weeks later, I drove by it and saw a couple sitting by the same window seat where I sat with him. The guy looked a lot like Jake. Same hair, same side profile. I slowed down at the lights to stare. He turned his head slightly, and for a split second, I swear he saw me. I don't know if it was him or someone else, but I sped off before I could find out.